Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and a very special welcome to a dear friend of mine, and I've been told not to call her Melanie because even though that's her name. Mel Smith coming all the way in from Sydney on this beautiful Monday. How are you, my friend?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Going splendidly, thank you. Going really well. We've known each other for a little while now, and you are running a very important function within the leadership space. You are the leadership and career coach at Metanoia Consulting Services, working with leaders and helping them progress their career to the senior leadership space. So very much looking forward to this conversation. So I must say, as we said before I press record, I'm just going to let the microphone be clear. And Mel, you're just going to just go bang and share lots of wisdom over the next 50 or so minutes. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think everybody better hold on for a bumpy ride.
Now, I will ask you some questions because there are some specific topics we want to delve into. But the first thing I'd like to know, and I always ask guests this question, just a little bit about your background and what you've done in your career that has led you to now working in the space where you're working with leaders across organizations and helping them plan for their next promotion, particularly to senior leadership.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so I spent 20 plus years working in various people and culture functions throughout my career. I've worked across a really broad range of industries, which is fun because it means that I've had lots of exposure to lots of different ways of doing things, lots of different thinking, which is cool. So I ended my career in people and culture at quite a senior level. I've run talent functions, I've run hypo programs. I understand what it takes to get to the executive level and stay at the executive level, which is always important. But I've always had a real passion for coaching. So for about 10 years of that time, I was really kind of in my mind thinking about how do I make a step out and just really focusing on coaching. Super passionate about helping people develop and grow and progress in their careers. So it was a bit of a no-brainer that if I could spend most of my time working in that space, I'd get the most satisfaction. So an opportunity arose for me to step out of corporate just over 12 months ago now. And me being who I am, I just jumped in, feet first, or head first, probably, and launched my business. So I haven't looked back. I've been coaching ever since, working with mid-level leaders who are looking to progress their careers. And I'm really, really fortunate to work with some pretty amazing people.
Yeah, look, I've been following your journey over the last 12 months, and it's been a lot of growth. And I do know, without giving too much away, there are some people that work with you who have their organization as a sponsor for them to help in their professional development. But there's also a percentage of people who you work with who they consider, and you shared with me this, hope it's okay if I share this, that you are their secret weapon
Yes.
in their
Yes.
career evolution.
Yeah, I mean, look, some people really want their organizations to be involved with providing feedback so that they can really focus in on where they're going to get the most growth in their organizations. But others, yes, they literally want me as their secret weapon who's backing them in the corner, helping them get insights and, build their leadership capability to progress without anyone being aware. It's the magic.
So let's specifically talk about, because there'll be a lot of people listening to this who are either existing in an existing leadership position, looking at maybe moving into a senior leadership position, or is actually an individual contributor that has the desire and they believe the potential to step up into a leadership role. The first question I wanted to sort of ask you is, what are some of the, I guess, the key challenges that people come to you with that might be preventing them from stepping up into that role?
Look, there's a few. I think that the biggest one is that when you get to a certain level in your career and you've been working in a technical area or a specific function for a really long period of time, you become a very high performer in this very bespoke space. And what I see very often is people who want to make that shift to senior leadership. It's this mindset shift, and which follows then a way that you turn up and the way that you operate, which requires you to stop looking down a silo into an area and start to look across an enterprise, across multiple areas, and understand how that system all kind of fits together and how you contribute. And I think the biggest missing link is people understanding what contribution looks like as they step up. And this happens for individual contributors as they become leaders, but it's a completely different gig when you're going from leadership of a team to leadership of a function or leadership across an organization. So all of a sudden you're going from my team who are doing the things to my team who are responsible for delivering organizational outcomes. And people often fail in that space. They fail to demonstrate their potential to think across an organization. And sometimes they make it through, but then they fail to deliver across the organization and they're still stuck in that functional zone. Their leaders below them are frustrated because they're still trying to do the doing of the things and they're like, you're squashing me, get off me. And the executive team are often frustrated because they're like, this is your A team now. The executive team is your A team. You're not here to represent just your function. You're here to think about how your function contributes to the system. Yeah.
It's a good point you make. And the question that pops up is, and it's almost like the chicken and the egg type of an approach, right? So people who have ambitions, and I've got a lot of, I guess, people that I work with who have this ambition to be more senior in the organization, but they're quite siloed in terms of their current responsibility and their thinking. So how do we help people who are maybe stuck in a function of they're looking after finance or they're looking after the sales function or looking after customer success, where they have an ambition to step up and they have to develop that critical thinking and across business approach. How do they start to think like that before they get the opportunity? Because there's one thing to have, I guess, passion and seek potential and think you've got the potential to do that. It's another thing entirely to start to demonstrate the skill sets so that a senior or an executive will actually see you as capable of being able to step into that role.
Yeah, there's a few things. The first thing that I would say is really, really useful is if you are finding yourself, if you are someone listening to this and you're finding yourself unable to get the opportunity to demonstrate that skill set, you need to go off and find projects, volunteer yourself, work on committees that are working across the organization. So the best way to build that ability is to actually put yourself in a position, even if it's not at that senior level, but where you have to work across. Because as soon as you have to work across, you have to be more aware of and understand all of the different components of the organization. Many, many organizations are looking for people to volunteer for projects, whether it be, re-engineering a system or a process or running a DEI committee or whatever it is. There's opportunities everywhere. Just be a little bit creative about what those opportunities are to put your fingers into multiple pies across the organization. The other thing that I would say is shadowing and mentorship opportunities. Like, I think we often sit back in our careers and we're sitting and waiting for people to come and tap us on the shoulder and say, hey, I'd love to be your mentor, or hey, how about you come and spend some time watching me do what I do, when the reality is the people who really do get that progression, they're the ones who are putting their hand up. They're going out and they're seeking sponsorship. They're going out and they're seeking mentorship. They're getting their hands out into the thought leaders in the market to understand what's going on. So it takes proactivity and a plan and some thinking. But if you're connecting in with mentors in the organization and you're getting some shadowing opportunities, like you're talking to your boss and saying, can I sit in on that senior leadership meeting? I just want to get an understanding of how they run. I'm happy to be the note taker.
Mm,
I just want to get the dynamics in the room, right? Proactivity, intentionally putting yourself forward is probably the first step. So cross organizational committees, projects, be a change champion. You know, organizations are going through really significant levels of change these days, more than ever before in history. So get involved, be a part of it, put your hand up and put some skin in the game and get some visibility as a result of it.
But Mel, I've got so much on my plate. I am so busy. You don't understand. My boss is riding me like a bucking bull, and I have
Mm,
no time to scratch myself. How do I find the time to do that? Because I'm sure you'll have those sort of challenges that are presented to you
yeah,
as a coach. That because when you mention mentoringship and coaching, you are one of those
yeah,
people who can provide that outside of
yeah,
the, I guess, the realm of the business. So
yeah,
how much of time is an excuse versus a legitimate blocker to our ability to seek that mentorship, to get on those change committees, to look
yeah,
at opportunities where I can contribute to the business on a wider scale?
yeah. I think that sometimes there are realities around time. Um, and I think sometimes there are excuses around time, which the underpinning fears underneath that are probably what we should talk about.
Mm,
But where time is an issue, often it's a reframe in your mind, right? Because if you're, take for example, like a change champion role, which gets you exposure or gets you the opportunity to represent a group of people, you're going to be impacted by that anyway.
yeah,
The difference is if you get involved, you can actually start to shape what that impact looks like and have a bit of skin in the game. And it may take you a little bit of extra time, but it'll buy you time back at the end and it'll give you some winnings overall. I think that if time is our problem, then we probably need to be thinking about how we shift our perception around prioritizing and how we're using our time. Because if time is an issue for you at a mid-level kind of leader space, how are you going to manage in a senior leader space where there's hundreds more priorities, where the teams are bigger, where there's bigger stakes? So what are you going to do? So, that's the one side. And then the fear piece, which makes people kind of go, oh, I don't know if I've got time. I don't know. Do you really want to? Do you really want to progress? Because we can work on mindset, we can overcome mindset pieces. But if we start with the foundation of yes, progression is the key, okay,
mm,
cool, let's work out what taking the leap looks like and let's help you do that in a comfortable way. I will say that in my experience, the busiest people that I've seen are usually not the most productive people that I've seen. And maybe that's a controversial statement to make. But the most successful people I see are organized, create space, work smart. And these are all tools that you can kind of work with
mm.
a coach or with a mentor or with a leader to develop within yourself. But I think that we need to challenge this perception that I'm the only person who can do something and I'm so busy and woe is me. Um, because you'll put a ceiling on your head. You've got to be creative, find other ways around things, work
Yeah,
smarter.
well, it's interesting you say that because there'll be people out there that say, "Oh, if you want stuff done, then always give it to a busy person because they'll find a way to get it done." But the thing is, there's always the flip side to that, that a busy person may not actually do anything well because they're so busy trying to keep as many plates in the air as possible. It's sometimes about prioritizing and saying which one is the most important thing to do now versus what can wait until tomorrow. But even more, as you mentioned this as well, how do I start to delegate? How do I start to delegate
Yeah,
to people within my team, some peers, or even start to delegate upwards as well?
yeah, yeah.
You
The other,
mentioned,
the
there you
other,
go.
sorry,
No, you're right.
I was going to say the other thing as well is what's the validation that you're getting from being the busy person?
Mm,
So what am I telling myself about who I am and my importance in the organization by being the busy person, and start to unpack and understand what some of that might be as well, because that can often keep us stuck as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an important point because when you were talking about just before all the stuff, and when you get elevated to a senior leadership position, you've got a whole host of new levels of complexity, probably higher expectations, shorter time frames, more demand. How much of the work that you do starts at the foundational level around why do you want to be a senior leader? What is it about the senior leader position? What is it going to give you? So thinking about why, the why part versus
Mm.
the perceived prestige that might come with a title or a position or a status within an organization. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that, when you think about it, it's probably not the best career move for them to get into a senior leadership role. So, how much of the clients that you're working with really have to sit down and analyze, why am I doing this? Why am I wanting to be a senior leader?
Anyone who works with me, our first planning discussion has a whole section on looking back at where you've come from. What are the bright spots? What energized you? What was it in the context of the environment that made you feel energized and good? Where are the environments where it hasn't felt like that? Right? Let's start to pick those things up and make sure they're front of mind. And then we go 10 years into the future, and it's about not just what you want to do for work, but who do you want to be as a person?
Hmm.
And what role does work have for you in that context? What kind of impact do you want to be having? What is the environment around you for you to be successful? So we go into a bit of a dream state. That why piece is fundamental to the discussions that we have. And some people, it is about kind of um, starting to move laterally so that they can take themselves in a direction where there is more purpose alignment for them.
Yeah.
But the purpose piece in my mind is pivotal, because I have this goal. For one of the reasons I work with mid-level leaders is because I know, firstly, they're the least invested in. And the gig is massive. Like when you shift up to that senior leadership level, it is a very different role. But the second thing is, I want to help create senior leaders that have more sustainability in their leadership style for themselves and for their
Yeah.
teams, that have more awareness of how they show up and the impact that it has on others, and then effectively have healthier organizations. Like if I could work with leaders and help organizations be healthier, that's kind of gold to me. So that's kind of threaded through all of my coaching.
Hmm.
It's about you, how you show up, how you can be more effective. And what does that mean in terms of the context of the organization that you need to be in? What's the environment? Who are the people around you? What impact are you having? And how does that then come back to the why, the next step? So what is that next step that gets you there? But it needs to be aligned to that 10-year horizon, 5 to 10 years. Some people can't go 10 years.
It's like
It's too
10
big.
years. 10 years is just a long, long time in the future. Man,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is that is huge.
Yeah. And when you're talking to parents who have got like 3 and 4 year olds and they're like in the thick of the parenting thing, and you're like, well, in 10 years, you'll have a 13-year-old. What
Hmm.
difference will that make? Right?
Yeah.
Like, let's actually take ourselves
Yeah.
outside of our little box.
Yeah. So with that, mentioning kids, because I know for a lot of people who are ambitious, who want to progress their career, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think, as coaches, as facilitators, we always want to work with ambitious people that want to
Yeah.
make a bigger contribution. What are some of the, I guess, the key blockers, particularly because I mentioned before we press record, some of the men that you deal with now are
Yes.
starting to ask questions around, well, what does this mean for me in terms of my time commitment, impacts on family and so forth. And for years, don't want to make this a gender thing, but for years, females have been asking the same question because a lot of organizations have percentages that we have to have an X number of females in senior leadership positions as a goal. But that
Yeah.
can be challenging to manage the expectations of the business, but also the expectations of my direct reports at home, right? Which at the end of the
Yeah.
day, they're the most important ones. What are some of the challenges and things you're coming up against for these people thinking about the senior leadership role?
Yeah, so as you say, I'm hearing more and more from men that I talk to about working together around, well, I don't know if I want to step up to senior leadership because I want to be at my kids' assembly when they're getting an award. And, I want to be able to switch off in the evenings and read them a book before they go to bed. And, I do think traditionally there has been this view that this is a woman's work and, men aren't interested, which is now really becoming a myth that's being busted, right? And we
Mm,
know this, but it's starting to become much more of a conversation that's being had. And so I think about this idea of sustainable leadership in terms of being able to be a leader who, and it's going to be hard for the first generations coming through, as it always is, but to start to set the tone on what senior leadership can and should look like,
mm,
so that as a society, we stop putting kids last. Because the way that our society is built is really that, kids are this thing that happens and it keeps our economy moving and all of that kind of stuff. But I read a really interesting article a couple of years ago around what if we had a kid-centered society? What would that look like? And so I feel for men and women coming up into senior leadership now, there's this, if you want it, go get it, but do it differently. And
yeah.
don't be scared of doing it differently, because when you do, you set an example and you create a different culture and you set the tone for those that are coming up below you. So that old adage, like you can't be what you can't see, is really true in this space, particularly for men who I had a guy when I was like about 10 years ago telling me that, taking parental leave as a man was a career limiting move. People think I'm not serious about my career. And I feel that that's really shifted over the
Yeah.
last 10 or 15 years. But, you know, we need to hear men talking about this is what new leadership can look like, as well as women, because it's got to be a human thing,
Yeah.
not just a gender-based thing.
I think it's a really important point, and particularly if you look at what happened across COVID, with the proliferation of different technologies and the fact that we now can use those to still stay connected, it means for a lot of organizations, you don't actually have to have the leader in the same location to be effective. We just need to have, I guess, the mechanisms to remain in contact, to still build those relationships wherever we happen to be. And I think there might be some that are still hanging on to the old adage that, what, I still have to be available all these time throughout the day, and I can't. I've got to make a sacrifice, and sometimes, well, most times, the sacrifice is family, as distinct
Yeah,
from sacrificing my team. But I think the way the leaders are now starting to evolve, we're starting to give permission, and particularly as we're talking about senior leaders. I
yeah,
talk to teams all the time that you've got to be the example you want to see in your team because your team is a reflection of you. So
yeah,
if you want to be home to sit down with your family at dinner time, if that's at 6 o'clock because you've got young kids, then do that, right? There's
yeah.
nothing wrong with that. So it's a bit of a paradigm shift for a lot of people because they've been used to being in the office until 6, 6:30, 7 o'clock. It's almost like a badge of honor. You don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, and I would argue that this has been going on for a long time. So COVID gave us the technology to get better connected.
Mm,
There's no doubt about it. But like 10 years ago, I was supporting a global function and we didn't do Teams or Zoom, but we had teleconferences where we were connecting up with the US, with Europe, with Asia, and that was really, really common. So I think there's this kind of thinking that this is a new concept, that this kind of hybrid or remote working thing is a new thing. Well, big
mm,
corporates, multinational corporations have been doing it for as long as they've been in existence because they couldn't exist without it.
yeah,
So I sometimes kind of laugh at this idea that for us to be productive, we all have to be together all of the time. Like it's
yeah,
bullshit. Let's
yeah,
be honest.
yeah.
I had national roles well before COVID. And I might get out to see those sites once a month or once every 2 or 3 months, but
Mm,
they were still serviced. They still got what they needed. And I wasn't boots on the ground at all.
yeah.
So I think there's a lot of hype around getting back into the office. But I think the reality is the dinosaurs need to go out into greener pastures, and let us recognize the benefits that we've received as a society from being more available, from having for life, for having the flexibility to incorporate different things into our lives.
Yeah.
And I saw something from the Reserve Bank a week or so ago where they were saying actually fully remote, yes, there's productivity issues. Fully face-to-face, there are productivity issues, but hybrid was the most productive way to work.
Okay.
So let's not go back to the 1950s because they are behind us. And let's really lean into what is possible. And to be really frank with you, Darren, I think that organisations that are doing these back to the office mandates and whatnot, they're really going to struggle to retain talent and
Yep.
attract talent in, because the organisations that are smart enough to keep on this hybrid kind of road, they're the ones who are going to win the war for talent. And there will be another war for talent. It's just around the corner.
Well, it's interesting you say that. A number of organizations just in the last 6 months that I've been working with, when they are talking about their talent acquisition strategy, they know that they have to have an element of hybrid working and flexibility in terms of working in there, because a lot of the people coming in looking at that organization as a future place of work, that's one of the first questions they ask is what's your working arrangements and how flexible are they, right?
Yeah.
And even like you being in Sydney, you got lots of traffic, but being in Melbourne right now, when I'm doing workshops in the city and it takes me 2 hours to get home after
Yeah.
doing a workshop, I'm thinking, how did I ever have a sales role when I was, running not so much sales team, but being able to see customers? It's just a waste of time, complete waste of
Yeah.
time. So there's got to be that level of
And
flexibility.
and let's also be honest, half the time you turn up somewhere and half the team are hybrid anyway.
That's right. That's
Right.
right.
So like I can't tell you how many times I've turned up for meetings and it's like, oh, hang on, we've just got to dial someone in.
That's
Like,
right.
and I'm perfectly fine with that. That's absolutely fine. But I think if you're going to bring people together as a leader, if you're really
Mm.
thinking about, I want my team to be present, be 100% intentional around the why. I'm bringing you together because we are doing this thing
Yeah.
that we can only do face to face.
Yeah. Yeah. And that gives people meaning, but it also gives people boundaries. And I think
Yeah.
as we talked before about some of the dinosaurs that are out there, yeah, there are some organizations that, and I've heard it from some executives to say, no, I need to have my team back in because then at least I can see them. And when I
Yes.
need them, I can go and tap somebody on the shoulder versus, hang on, you've got a mobile phone, you've got a piece of technology with you. That person is only a Teams call away. You don't have to physically have them here, but yet their thinking is stuck in the 1950s, or in some cases the 1990s.
Yeah.
It's not good. So with the senior leadership role then, because a lot of
Yeah.
this will come down to culture. So I'm curious around the people that you're working with, and people who are listening to this who are looking to make the step up from, say, mid-level people management into senior executive. We've talked about the fact you've got to have a wider view of the business. How much from your experience does culture of the organization play into this? And how important is it for the person looking to step up into a senior leadership role, gets really dialed in on and maybe assesses the culture to say, well, is this culture and does this culture support what I stand for, what I believe, and who I want to become? Because I'm here to drive high performance. Is the culture going to be an enabler, or is the culture potentially going to be an inhibitor?
That is huge. And the way that I've described it to some people is, if you're turning up to a soccer field to play soccer, but you've got a basketball and you don't have shin pads and soccer socks or whatever, you're playing a ball sport in the wrong place, with the wrong rules, with the wrong people, right? So you could be an amazing sports person, but that doesn't mean that you're going to fit in any sport that
Mm,
you choose. So you've got to pick your field of play. And so, thinking about where am I going to be most effective? What are my strengths? Where am I going to have the opportunity to leverage those strengths? What are my values? Where is there a lack of values alignment? Because those things all impact how energized you are at work, how easy it is for you to show up and be authentic, all of those things, right? So for me, if you're a soccer player and that's the game you want to play, get your shin pads and your soccer boots and head over to the soccer field. Don't take those things to a basketball court or vice versa. It just doesn't work. Know the rules,
Yeah.
right? If you think about, and I can't believe I'm using a sporting example, but if you think about understanding the rules of play before you show up, it's so critical, and that's your culture. Those are your signals and the behaviors and what's rewarded and what's not. You need to know those things and understand them, because not every environment is going to be suitable for you. So yeah, it is 100% important. You could get the same job description, two different cultures, and
Yeah.
your performance will be impacted significantly based on your ability to align to that culture and the values. You have to think about it.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I was just reflecting as you were talking there about an experience I had many years ago, and I won't mention the organization, but people who know me can work out who I'll be talking about. But I had this, I came into an organization and the executive director was quite a flamboyant, characteristic, go-getter, build a great high-performing culture. And I thought to myself, yeah, I would like to be in a position like that. I liked what they represented and liked what they did. But then I realized that that person was a slave to the organization, that their time was not their time. And there was a number of situations where they had to jump on a plane because a senior executive had said, you need to be in this state or this location tomorrow morning for this very important meeting. And they had no option but to say yes, right? And so very quickly I started to realize, well, is this all it is cracked up to be? Is this the real culture or is this the pretend culture? So you've got to make those decisions. And this is why we keep asking the question, why do you want to be a senior leader? Why do you want to step up? What
Yeah,
is it about stepping up that's so important? Because if you're doing it for the prestige and what you think is the accolades that are going to come with it, I can tell you quite unequivocally, it's not what you think it's going to be. It's going to be
that's
blood, sweat,
right.
and tears. You're not necessarily going to get the accolades you think you're going to get.
Yeah. And look, the higher up the tree you get, the more the results sit on you. So it's got to be something that you've got to be in the environment where you feel very comfortable to be yourself and to drive in the way that you like the alignment piece.
Yeah.
Because if you're fighting culture, it's like swimming against the tide.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to get the results that you're looking to get, which is then going to impact your reputation, which then means like, hey, when the questions are asked, well, who's ultimately responsible? Well, that's you.
Yeah.
So what have you done to, make sure, do your due diligence as you're going through interview processes? I think the other thing that people forget is they see opportunities, they're like, oh, job opportunity on LinkedIn, I'm going to apply for this job. This looks amazing. You're interviewing them
Yeah.
just as much as they're interviewing you. Look for the signs and the signals in the job ads, in their interview processes, in their onboarding processes, right? Like, what are the things that are popping up? Don't ignore the red flags. Don't ignore them. Listen to your gut, because they're there for a reason. And I have also in the past kind of ignored some flags, thinking this is going to be a great opportunity. I'm going to be able to do all the things and, get this legacy piece that I really wanted to land. And I fell flat on my face, to be quite frank, because the values alignment was not there at all. And I found myself fighting the system
Yeah.
because the decision making was not aligned to the way that I would make decisions.
Yeah. And it's such a valid point, and it reminds me of the terminology that often people get promoted to a higher level of incompetence because we get attracted to people who are like us. And if we've got, and I've seen it in corporates, and you've probably seen it as well in some of the enterprises and government departments you've worked in, that if you've got an alignment with a certain individual or group of people, they will do whatever it takes to make you look good. So like attracts like. So we'll give them every opportunity of being promoted, but they may not necessarily have the competency. They may not have the values alignment. They may not have the experience, or they may not have the emotional intelligence to be able to take that step. They can't necessarily
Yeah.
have a difficult conversation. So we've got to be really careful what we wish for at the end of the day.
Yep. 100%. And when my, I guess, unsolicited advice to anyone who's listening is be really aware of dynamics and who you are tying your, like, which horse are you tying your cart to? Because there have been many, many times in my career where I've seen those people who are the yes people who are all lined up behind like a significant leader.
Yeah.
And when that leader's fallen, it's like dominoes, boop, 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 right?
Yes.
So really being very conscious of, why am I tying my cart to this horse?
Yeah.
Is it because I actually really believe in this person and what their purpose is, and I will die on a cross behind them because of that? Or
Yeah.
is it because I see them as having a position of power and they're going to push my career along? Be honest with yourself.
So let's talk a bit more about that because I have a certain
Mm.
belief around this that certainly as senior leaders, you've got to respect people, and obviously you've got to respect the, I guess, the ecosystem and the organizational structure, so you don't become a rogue. But we want people who are independent of thought, who have the
Mm.
capacity and the courage to call bullshit when they see bullshit,
Yeah.
to call people out when they're not perhaps adhering to the values that we have come up with as an organization. So in the work that you do and the experiences that you've had, how much of it is I need to be my own person. I need to know what I stand for, who I am. I'm more than happy to align with certain people, but I'm not going to align to the point where I'm literally going to put my wagon to their horse and wherever they go, I'm going to go and therefore I'll be looked after. Or if they don't, if something happens, I then become the collateral damage. How much of it is working with people to create this independence of thought that I do have the courage to call people on their bullshit, irrespective of what that might mean for me in an organization?
Mm. Oh, you're asking the wrong person. So my strength profile, top strength fairness, second strength bravery.
Okay.
So I have no problem calling people's bullshit,
Yeah.
right? And which is not the case for everybody.
Yeah.
If I was to give advice to people coming through, I would say start with your values first. Start there. Understand the organizational values second, because where there's alignment there, it's easier to call things out.
Yeah.
Where there's a misalignment happening out there, the third thing I would say is you need to be politically astute.
Yeah.
Understand the power dynamics of the people in the organization and the people around you. Now, you don't necessarily have to do anything with that. I
Yeah.
am not an advocate of political play. That's just not my deal. It's not how I operate. Some people have that mind, that's fine. But I would say, regardless of playing in that space, you need to have an awareness. And this is something that becomes really important when you're thinking about how you influence people, how you negotiate things, when you're working at that executive level, understanding the agendas,
Yeah.
understanding the mission on the hill. You have to have this awareness of what's going on around you and knowing where your hard lines are
Mm.
in terms of your values and what you will call out,
Yeah.
and where there might be something that feels a bit more relaxed because you don't have a hard line around it. This is the stuff, because you can't be authentic to yourself if you're diverting from your values all the time. But we're not going to grow if we're so rigid that we're not willing to flex and bend. So you've
Yeah.
got to know the hard spots and the flexible spots and work within that frame, is what I would say. Um, I think the the understanding that we're all humans, that we come from spaces with experiences, that we have cultural backgrounds that will lend ourselves to calling things out or not, that there might be different ways that we need to engage with people so that they can have things called out,
Mm.
is really important as well. So there's not one way to call something out, and there's
Yeah.
not one environment to call it out in. And if I'm sitting in an office in Singapore and I'm seeing some bad behaviors, I'm not going to call that out in a public space. I'm
No.
going to have a quiet on the side conversation because that's culturally
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
If I'm sitting in an Australian organization and we're all kind of like at each other all the time, I might call it out in the moment because that's culturally safe to do that, right? So I
Yeah.
think there's so many layers to
There
calling
is.
the bullshit.
There is. There is. But the key thing as a senior leader, we have to be able to call that and have the courage to call that, right? And
Yeah.
the key thing is we've got to make sure we play the issue, not the person. Because
Yes.
and this is the other question. So you looked puzzled then?
Yeah, because I play the issue, not the person, in consideration of who the person is and where they've come from and what their personality is as well. Like it has to be a consideration.
Oh,
The
absolutely. So
person has to be a consideration.
yeah, so when I say that, when I'm giving feedback to an individual, I never believe that you are a bad person.
No.
You
Yes,
might
got
just
you.
demonstrate a misunderstanding or a miscommunication, or your behavior is. I'll go hard on the behavior, but I'll go soft on the individual because I separate the behavior from the person. Because
Love that. Yeah.
If Mel knew better, she would do better.
Yes. And if you're helping me see a blind spot over here,
That's it. That's
yeah.
it. So, because part of this is when we get into senior leadership roles, and I see this a lot, that because like attracts like, I've seen senior leaders build a team around them who are literally like them. And that can
Yeah.
lead to yes people, it can lead to groupthink, it can lead to the leader's ego being built up to the point where they have massive blind spots, but they don't see them at all, right?
Yeah.
So this is why we talk about the fact you've got to have the robust conversation. And Patrick Lencioni, sorry, talks about this in terms of the dysfunctions of a team. You want to
Yes.
have an environment where robust conversation is encouraged, and you want to have diversity of people coming
Yes.
into the
And
team.
diversity of thought.
Yes, and not be wedded to, and be
100%.
open to be, I guess, influenced.
Yeah. And what do you need as a leader to be open to be influenced? Do you know what I mean? Like, what is the mindset that you need to have to
Mm,
be able to take on? Like, what is the thing that you're scared of that creates a barrier to people giving you feedback? How do you show up and be you obviously less accessible if people
mm,
aren't willing to have those conversations with you? You just reminded me, I once supported a leader who, and I won't mention their background or where they came from, but he said to me, you know, it's really funny. Like I was in the last organization I was in, there was a point that I woke up and realized that everyone around me was exactly like me. And I was like, oh, yeah, interesting. As he was trying to hire people exactly like him, and I was constantly challenging his thinking around, do you think that person is really the right fit for that role? Or do we need a little bit more kind of challenge in this space? But
yeah.
you need some psychological safety to be able to, from a leader, to be able to gather that feedback. And if you're thinking about when you're in that mid-level space, mid-level leader space, that's a perfect opportunity to start to build this muscle around proactively requesting feedback from people below you to try and
Mm,
understand your blind spots. And if you can start to do that at this level,
yeah.
as you move into more senior leadership, you'll have A, greater awareness, but B, greater courage to continue asking up and sideways and
Yeah.
down. Help me understand myself better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
It's such an important point because you got which leads me to the next question I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
I had a philosophy that I used myself, and when I was working in corporate, I helped people who I was mentoring instill this in them as well. The importance of at a mid-level manager position, getting prepared for a senior leadership opportunity. How important is it to be thinking and acting as if you're already in that role before the role actually gets bestowed upon you? Can you just talk about your thoughts around that?
I think that is a fantastic way to interview for senior leadership, or to audition for senior leadership. Because the biggest leap with senior leadership is that it is a mindset shift.
Mm,
So the more that you can take on that, if I was a director in this organization, how would I approach this situation? Having that question going on in the back of your mind will help to, it's like the thing you focus on, right?
mm,
If I focus on how I would make decisions at that level, I'm going to start noticing how other leaders at that level are making decisions. I'm going to start to think about which pieces I like and what I'm going to pull back into my leadership. And that's going to help me then to become what I want to be intentionally.
yeah.
And I think that that's a missing piece for a lot of people. Like a lot of people I work with, these are some of the conversations we have
Mm,
around who is it that you want to be? Who do you love what you see of from that level, and who do you really not love what you see? And let's start to pull those little ingredients together so that you can
Yeah.
start to decide what you want to be, not just wait and hope
Yeah.
for when you get there.
Because the opportunities don't, because, and this is the interesting thing, right? I'll be interested in your take on this around some of the
Mm.
people you work with. I'm staggered at the number of people that believe they should be promoted. They haven't actually started to think in terms of placing themselves in the shoes of the people they wanted to be part of in terms of the senior leadership group. They think they've got the technical capability or they've got the runs on the board, and therefore it's almost like a given right that the next evolution is, of course, they'll be just promoted to a senior leadership role without any consideration of the switch in mindset, the fact that you're going to
Yeah,
have to, elevate your thinking, your ability to critically think. You're going to be making a lot more commercial based decisions, not just in your silo, but it's across the
yeah,
business. You've got to think and act like a person who's already in that role before you even get the position bestowed upon you. It's just staggering to think.
yeah. So I've run a lot of talent management processes. And it's really, really interesting to sit in a room, often use a 9 box where you're looking at potential on one axis and performance on the other. And you've got all these really high performers who are nowhere near a talent box
Yeah,
because all they do is really high performance. And in fact, they run this risk of becoming the safe pair of hands. Like, we don't want to promote them because they're so good at what they do there. And by the way, they're not really demonstrating potential to lead at the
yeah,
next level. And so one of the things that people miss when they're looking at senior leadership is one of the key components or the key criteria for that step is demonstration of your potential to lead at the next level.
yeah,
And when you're focusing in on performance in the technical area, and I speak to people all the time, Darren, who are like, I'm thinking about going off and doing an MBA. I'm thinking about going and doing another degree, or people who end up in my feed who have rows of letters after their names, and they've been in their roles for like 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, because they're doubling down on what they're doing
yeah,
rather than actually lifting up, sticking their head above the parapet and going, oh, maybe I need to do something a little bit differently up here.
yeah,
And they're frustrated
yeah,
and they're resentful.
yeah.
It should have been my job,
Yes.
but should it?
Shoulda, coulda, woulda, but wasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah,
what we're saying there is that things like MBAs, and there's nothing wrong with going to do that, but you've got to think about what is the purpose of that, right? What is
100%.
it's designed to help me? It's not because I've seen the same thing. I've seen people go and do an MBA thinking that would be their ticket to the senior suite, right? And then when they get the MBA, they realize that it was just a piece of paper that probably ended up spending them, costing them 80 grand or whatever to do it.
Yeah,
But they never got the elevation because it was the purpose by which they thought it was going to be the ticket, but it wasn't because they haven't got the capability that's been demonstrated.
yeah,
So it's a really interesting point. Which leads me to I guess the final piece of the puzzle, and we talked before we press record about the current situation in the economy, whether it be here in Australia or overseas, and all the uncertainty and volatility and cost of living stuff, etc., etc.
yeah.
It's a tight market, right? It's a highly competitive market. So for the people that are listening to this who have the ambitions and the desires to move into a senior leadership role, to be promoted, um, when we're talking about a tight market, what are some things that we could be thinking about as possible differentiators to build our capability to make us more
Mm.
attractive in the market?
Well, my question to people is, what would you do if you were selling yourself,
Yeah,
right? You need to build your brand. You need to be known. And the way that I talk to people around building their brand is, who are the people who need to be talking about you?
yeah,
What do you need them to be saying about you? Who are the decision makers who are going to have influence on those people?
yeah,
And how are you getting to them? Right? Let's be strategic, particularly if it's an internal move. Sometimes it's easier with an external move because you're an unknown entity. But when you're
mm,
internal, you've got history.
yeah,
And sometimes that means that you've got some people who are on your side and some people who aren't, right? So be really honest, map your stakeholders, really think strategically about what I want them to be saying about me, feeling about me, who's advocating for me, and how are they doing that. You can do that externally in the market as well. I think one of the other things is when people are going and looking for promotions external to their organization, there's a couple of pitfalls. The first one is people will scattergun with their applications all over the place,
Yeah.
hoping that one will stick. And my response to people who are doing that is start to pull down. What is this actual next role? What are the must-haves in the next role that are going to put you onto your career pathway? And when I work with
Yeah.
people, we start with that 10-year horizon and come back to the next role. And then be very intentional about building your network around that focus niche.
Yeah.
The other thing that I see people doing is, maybe working with 100 different recruiters. Find two or three.
Yeah.
Find two or three, tell them that you want to partner, find someone who is actually interested in your career, who is aligned with your values, and work closely with them. Working with too many recruiters is just like saturating the market with your resume, and it doesn't
Yeah.
look good. I see this happen a lot in the public sector.
Okay.
Everyone talks to everyone. Stop. Just stop it, right? And start to be strategic and focused. So tight markets are really competitive. How are you standing out? What is the narrative that you're putting out there around yourself? How are you putting that narrative into your, communications? How are you putting it into your LinkedIn profile? It's a really important place to be thinking about
Yeah.
where you're building your brand and what it says about you. Put your bloody photo on LinkedIn.
Oh,
Put your
as
photo
simple
on
as that.
LinkedIn. Sometimes it is, right? Like, if people like recruiters, if they're going to headhunt you, the first place they go is your LinkedIn profile. If your
Yeah.
LinkedIn profile is so locked that they can't see any of your information, moving on, don't have
That's
time for
it.
this, right?
That's it.
So think about all the touch points, but be very strategic about who you're engaging with, how you're partnering, what people need to be thinking, seeing, and saying of you or
Love
about
it.
you.
Love it. Could I throw another little thing in there? And I'd love your take on this because I know this
Yeah.
works in the realms that I work in the sales area, and that is look at what you can give, not what you can take.
Yeah. 100%. So I talk to people about this when we're talking about building networks.
Yeah.
Offer to help,
Hmm.
offer to add value, offer to connect someone with someone, start with or ask for help.
Yeah.
Those two kind of pieces work really well together. But
Yeah.
the worst thing that you can do is kind of go, hey, connect with me because I'm looking for a new job.
And we see this all the time, and you probably get this. I get it all the time from people who are wanting to connect with me because they're a podcast promoter or they're a LinkedIn expert, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So I look at that and I think, okay, I'm going to accept that because I'm really intrigued as to what you do next. And many of them come in and say, I can promote your podcast and blah blah blah. Would you like to talk about my services, etc., etc. And there's no relationship, there's no giving,
No.
there's no curiosity, there's
Yeah.
nothing. So be a giver and not a taker.
Yeah. I agree with that. I
Yeah,
think that it'll take you forward threefold,
correct,
100%. Yeah.
correct. Love it. So Mel, this has been a fabulous conversation. Really, I've taken a heap of notes, and hopefully the people listening to this have got a lot of value out of it as well. If there was one final piece of advice that you're giving to people that we haven't covered yet, as a not as a catch-all, but something that
Yeah.
perhaps people could think about immediately implementing, what would that be?
Oh, it's too many pieces of advice, Darren. Be true to yourself.
Yeah,
I really think that it's about if you're true to yourself, that will impact the pathway that you choose to take your career, the way that you turn up, making sure that you're authentic. It will demonstrate vulnerability for the people who work with you and around you. I think, yeah, that true to the self piece and get out of your own way. Just get out of your own way. Stop telling yourself that you're not good enough or I just need one more thing or whatever it is. Just, yeah. Can I give two? Is that all right?
that's fine. That's all good.
Okay.
That's all good. I like it. Be true to yourself and get out of your own way. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Mel, when people want to connect with you, and how can they do that? Is it on LinkedIn? What's the best place for people to connect if they want to know more about you
Yeah.
and certainly connect with you?
Yep. So Melanie Smith at Metanoia Consulting. You can search me on LinkedIn. You'll find me there. Drop me a DM. Very, very happy to have a chat. Otherwise, my website is metanoiaconsulting.com.au, and you can book in a discovery call with me there as well.
Cool. Excellent. I'll put both of those in the show notes, and I encourage people listening to this to certainly connect with Mel. She's an absolute champion, and it'd be well worth having at least a conversation with you. So, hey Mel, thanks for this. It's been a great conversation,
So
and thanks for
welcome.
being such a great guest on the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really had a lot of fun. Thanks.
Excellent. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com, and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.